안녕 친구들. If you're wondering what that greeting was, it just means hello friends. And if you look at the beginning part of my recap for episode 10, it explains that. And I do want to reiterate two announcements. Two announcements. One is that I'm going to try a truncated version of these recaps because just from a viewer's perspective, it's just 30 plus minutes is way too long. So I'm going to try to keep it under 30 minutes definitely. So for episode 10, I was successful. Yay! Under 20 minutes for that one. We'll see how this one goes. And then the second announcement I wanted to ask was to ask you for comments below to tell me feedback-wise whether you prefer the shorter version or the longer detailed recaps. So anyway, let's go ahead and resume. Today was a long day of lectures, so if my brain is a little bit tired and I don't articulate as well or my storytelling isn't all that great, forgive me. Alright, so episode 11 picks up with the kitchen master and Kang Chi celebrating. So Kang Chi's eating his little chicken while the kitchen master is just oohing and awing over the hat. And what's interesting though is they start talking, and Kang Chi tells the kitchen master his dream of being able to reclaim the 100-year inn for his family and just how he wants to regain his family and live happily with them. Well, the kitchen master very wisely asks, what will you do if circumstances change? If they no longer see you that way or can accept you in your new form? Or if they've changed and the bonds that hold you as family are no longer there. And that question gives Kang Chi pause, but he just thinks, oh no, that'll never happen. He doesn't have to worry about that. Well, in the meantime, Chung Jo is, hearing, of course, that Chogonung is going to violate her in, pretty soon. And so she asks after he leaves if to the head mistress of the brothel if it's true, and the mistress says, hey, you know what, you have no choice. If this is your lot in life, then you need to accept it and learn how to survive. Well, Chung Jo then takes up a broken shard of porcelain glass that she had dropped when she had heard from shock, that she had dropped from shock when she heard that Chogunung was going to demand an evening with her or a night with her. And she puts it up to her wrist and says, I'll kill myself before I let that happen. Well, what's awesome is that the headmistress smacks Chung Jo across the cheek and says, you know what? Don't think about dying. Think about how you can live and how you can make some meaning of your life. Because in this land that we live in this time, there are so many more people who die much more pitiful deaths than you and have much more tragic lives than you. And I just remember thinking as I was watching it, yay, the headmistress is such a level-headed woman, and I'm hoping that with her guidance, Chung Jo can actually become someone who can think for herself and become a positive asset to society instead of just, one of those puppets, like trophy wives, if you will. So anyway, we cut scene to now Tae Suh begging Kang Chi, please save my sister. And of course, Yeo Wool hears this. And she overhears Tae Suh giving Kang Chi permission to marry, Chung Jo and take her away and live happily ever after, but, away from society, of course, to keep Chung Jo safe. And so it throws Yeo Wool off for the entire day, and she's not herself during the training exercises as she's overseeing the soldiers they're training. And so she walks away and she's still lost in thought. And then she happens to see Kang Chi, who himself is lost in thought, and she walks by him. It's really cute. She walks by him and he doesn't notice, and so she finally plops down, and they have this really great conversation where she gives him advice, and then he promises her. And there's this really great moment where Kang Chi says, what would you know of women's feelings? Because Yeo Wool said, you know what, just tell her. You never know. She could say, hey, it's okay. You're still Kang Chi, right? No matter what you look like on the outside, you're still Kang Chi. And at first, Kang Chi's like, really? And then he's like, what would you know of women's hearts? And she's like, hey, don't forget, I'm a woman too. And then he asks, have you ever been in love? And then she says, of course I have, but then she kind of backpedals because she doesn't want him to know about her feelings, and so she kind of brushes it off and says, not yet. And then so Kang Chi kind of like gives her a hard time, and they tease her. I mean, he teases her and things like that. But anyway, Kang Chi says, don't worry, if I do leave, I'll tell you first. And, they build this really great friendship, and I think that's what I really appreciate about those two, that despite whatever's going on, you know that their relationship is really founded on mutual respect and friendship as well. Well, as they're joking around with each other, Pyong Joon sees how well his daughter is getting along with Kang Chi, and he starts to worry. So he then talks with the kitchen master and asks about the bet, and how the kitchen master, whether the kitchen master knew, and that was why he sent Kang Chi over to get Lee Soon Shin's hat and all of the things with the silver. And the kitchen master just asks or makes a comment about Kang Chi and his desire for humanity, and how, if that's the case, he doesn't think that Kang Chi is really all that bad. Well, Chung Jo, on the other hand, is taking a look at the little gift that Kang Chi last gave her, which was this little porcelain ceramic vial of medicine, right? Well, then, now that we know what the secret sign looks like between the good guys, I noticed that that's the sign on the porcelain, container. And I know some of you have probably already spotted that, earlier. My apologies. But she sees that. She kind of cradles it, and then as she cradles it, though, her maidservant from the 100-Year Inn comes, and they hug, and apparently she's there on an errand because Cho Bo-nung has sent her with a bunch of jade and all these beautiful hair pieces and silk, and, accessories and things like that. Well, it turns out that he sent all of those to her as a way for her to pretty herself up when he comes to visit her that night. Well, the veteran courtesans see this and they get really upset, but then they leave making a snide comment saying, well, of course, this is the least that he can do price-wise if he is going to bed. He's going to force a girl to bed, her father's enemy, right? Well, the servant then finds out, the maidservant finds out what's going to happen. She rushes back and tells Kang Chi's father and her servant friend, and they decide that they're going to go tell Kang Chi. So what happens is Cho Bo-nung then sees this, his head minion sees the servants, conspiring, and Cho Bo-nung says, let them. They don't realize that they're actually helping our plan. Well, the servant seeks out Kang Chi, tells him, and Kang Chi's like, oh my gosh, I have to break in tonight to get Chung Jo. And Yeo Wool stops him and says, I'm going with you. And it's so cute how both guys, Kang Chi and Kwon, are like, no. And so Yeo Wool insists, especially because Kwon keeps putting on the, what is it? He says, your father left, and, Kang Pyong Joon actually left to go on a mission. But he said, your father left you in charge, and, he wants you to take care of this. And she's like, I don't need to because, hi Dad, what's up? That was my father. Anyway, so Tan Pyong-joon had left Yeo Wool and Kwon in charge of taking care of the military academy. Well, Yeo Wool looks at Kwon and she's like, well, you're here, so you can take care of it. I'm going to go and help Kang Chi. And Kang Chi doesn't want that, but what can they do, right? Yeo Wool devises his plan, and off they go. Well, they don't, Kang Chi says, let's not tell Tae Suh because he doesn't really, need this extra burden. Tae Suh already overhears. And so as he walks away from the, I guess the covert meeting that the good guys had, he runs into the kitchen master, who looks at Tae Suh and says, Tae Suh, your eyes look funny. What's going on, right? And then Tae Suh, just kind of backs away silently. And the master says, don't make any rash decisions. You may not be thinking clearly because you're still, in the grips of that guy's enchantment, right? Well, we then have this really beautifully orchestrated scene where all these people are waiting for evening to fall. Chung Jo's waiting, her destiny. The headmistress, I think her name is Soo Ryun. I love the fact that she is plotting and planning, and there's this really great scene where the camera focuses on one of her little dress accessories, and you get the sense that it's really significant, that we'll find out later on. But anyway, the headmistress's plan is to protect Chung Jo with all that she has available, and so she tells her head servants to turn off all the lights in the brothel and to notify the girls that there will not be any guests that day, and they basically close the entire place for business. And then she sits literally in the front courtyard waiting for Cho Gun-won, who arrives very soon. And the door is open, and he says, "What is this? I told you I was going to come tonight. Why is everything closed or lights turned off?" And then Soo Ryun tells him, as my position as headmistress, I need to protect all of those in charge, and I am putting my foot down, basically, and I'm going to protect Chung Jo. And she says, if you don't, like what I say, then I guess what you're going to have to do is behead me, right? So Cho Gun-won basically gets ready to behead her. And he says, do you think that, you mere person can stop me, right? Because Soo Ryun actually tells him, do you remember from 20 years ago that there were 2 lives lost? I can't allow something like that to happen again, and I will guard these women with my life. And so into this conflict, though, as Cho Gun-won takes out the sword about to behead her, Kang Chi, it's so awesome. He's on the roof, and he's like, you shouldn't do that anymore. And then he hops down, and then he kneels in front of the headmistress, and he thanks her for keeping Chung Jo safe. And then he says, don't worry, I'll take care of it from here on out. And then you see Kang Chi start to fight. But the funny thing is, Kang Chi doesn't fight, and we flash back to Yeo Wool's scheme, where she tells Kang Chi, don't fight the guys, just lure them out into this little area, like a public place. And once he's there, what she plans on doing is having some of the soldiers from the academy dressed exactly like Kang Chi, acting as decoys so that Kang Chi can get away. Well, they totally do that, and as Cho Gun-won follows his minions out the door in hot pursuit of Kang Chi, he throws the headmistress a like meaningful look, like I'll deal with you later, and then he goes stalking off, right? Well, Soo Ryun, the headmistress, with her head servant, goes to find and check on Chung Jo to see if she's okay. Well, during that time, Chung Jo has already slipped out just to kind of see what the commotion's about, and she runs into Yeo Wool, who then helps her escape. And so they're running through the woods, and they end up finding their way back to the military academy. Well, what's interesting is that as evening approaches and all of that, Kwon is standing guard waiting for Yeo Wool to return. And the kitchen master comes upon him, and he's like, hey, so what are you doing out here? Who are you waiting for? And, Kwon says, oh, I'm waiting for Yeo Wool. She hasn't returned yet. And then the kitchen master says, why don't you, are you concerned because she and Kang Chi are spending quite a bit of time together, and they're there together now? And, Kwon says it's not my place, and the kitchen master just says, why don't you be a little bit more assertive and make your feelings known to her? And Kwon pretty much says, I've been a shadow. I've been her shadow for so long, it's not my place to say anything. My place is just to guard and protect her. And it's just so heart-wrenching because he's such a great guy, great second lead, and, he's not going to get her. But anyway, he ends up waiting throughout the early morning, all night long outside, and during which time Chung Jo and Yeo Wool reunite with Kang Chi and the other, academy, soldier decoys. And Yeo Wool kind of watches as Kang Chi and Chung Jo hug and have this reunion, and it's just really painful. It's painful for her to watch them together. But anyway, they return to the academy, and of course Kwon is smiling to see Yeo Wool back. And it's so cute because as Yeo Wool walks back, she kind of pats him on the shoulder to say that everything's okay. And then you have this very heartfelt reunion between Tae Suh and Chung Jo, and Tae Suh says, Never again will I let any harm come to you. I will protect you. And then Kang Chi from outside that room hears and he turns away to walk away. And he then sees Yeo. So, they have this discussion, and during that time, what happens is we find out what Tan Pyong-jun's been up to, what his mission was, why he left the military academy in Yeo and Kwon's hands. What he did was he was getting overly concerned about Kang Chi and especially Yeo's involvement with Kang Chi and her growing attachment because he's seen Yeo joke around with Kang Chi and all this stuff. So he goes to see Sojong, the monk, and he says, I need to know everything about Kang Chi. And he learns that, because he asked, can Kang Chi become human? And I think Sojong tells him some things that, really trouble Pan Pyong-jun. And so he's really concerned for his daughter. So when he returns, he sees Chung Jo in the courtyard. And of course he's furious because, it's one thing to harbor Tae Suh, but it's another thing to harbor Chung Jo. And so he called it so cute. Not cute, but, I think it's funny. He calls Tae Suh, Yeo into his little study area and he's chewing them out saying, what is going on? How could you have let this happen? And Yeo tries to take responsibility saying, I ended up orchestrating everything. It's not their fault and things like that. Well, Kang Chi walks in to that meeting and he says, will it help if I leave with Chung Jo? And then he turns to Tae Suh and he's like, Tae Suh, what do you say? Do you want me to leave with Chung Jo and basically live a life in exile? And Tae Suh, you can tell that he's really, trying to maintain his expression. That's a really difficult decision for him, but he says, yes, if you could, thank you, right? And so while that's going on, Chung Jo's outside and she's looking at that little ceramic medicine container again, and she notices that the symbol is now a reflection of the big, huge statue that's out in the courtyard, and it causes her to think back to something that had happened when they were children, when Yeo had come by and given her a vial that looked very similar to that, and said, my name is Tam Yeo, can you give this to Kang Chi? And at first I was like, why? And it dawned on me. It was the incident was right after Kang Chi had gotten bitten by the dog, remember, in protecting Yeo. And so she brought her little vial of medicine to ask her, Chung Jo to give to Kang Chi so that he would heal better. Well, you see this bratty little Chung Jo go to the pond and throw it. And so Kang Chi never knows that Yeo had brought him this little medicine salve thing. And she's making the connection now that is very similar to the one that Yeo had given. And now she knows that Yeo is a girl, right? Because, back then, depending on dress and, hair, they couldn't tell between girls and boys. Excuse me. So anyway, as she makes this realization, she looks up and she sees literally Yeo walking out of the conference room and Kang Chi following her, and both of them are upset. Kang Chi's following her saying, hey, Yeo, wait up, let me explain. And she is peeved. And she's like, she whirls around, she's like, I thought you said you were going to tell me first. How could you have made that announcement in front of everyone without having said a single word to me first, right? And they say a bunch of things, and then as a way to get her attention, instead of calling her Pamgun, he finally says Yeo. And I think when he calls her that, it shocks both of them. And Yeo just looks at him with tears in her eyes, and that's when Kang Chi realizes, her feelings for him, and his facial expression changes. Well, Yeo rushes into her room and she closes the door behind her, and then Kang Chi apologizes through the door. He says, I'm sorry, number one, that I didn't tell you first. And then I even wrote it down here because I wanted to make sure I remembered. Right. So he says, number one, I'm really sorry I didn't tell you first. And then he says, I'm sorry that I have such a weak resolve as a man, because one of the things that Yeo had thrown back at him was saying, how could you not have, told me first? And then she says, I thought you wanted to stay here and become human. Is your resolve to become human so weak and stuff, right? So he apologized, saying, I'm sorry that I have such weak resolve. And then he says, but I also thank you for always being on my side, right? And so, the hand, it's like a beautiful scene where she's on the other side of the door crying like this, trying not to make any noise. And his hand is literally just kind of like fingering the door, wanting to not knowing how to reach out to her, right? Well, he walks out and he just kind of numbly sits on the staircase. And Chung Jo sees that and she's starting to get an idea that Kang Chi has changed and that, Yeo Wool may be very important to him. Well, they then get ready to leave the next morning and they're packing up. And of course, Yeo Wool isn't, she refuses to say her goodbyes to him, Kang Chi, so she locks herself up in a training room and she's practicing her martial arts. Kang Chi and Chung Jo say goodbye to Kwon and, Pyong Joon, as well as the kitchen master. And then they say their goodbyes to Tae Suh, right? And during that time, though, we know that Cho Gonum has hired, he's chewing out his head minion, and he's saying, I've hired the gangster guy from the village who knows the most about Kang Chi to track him down. And that gangster guy has hired all the bounty hunters in the area to track down Kang Chi. Well, the two of them now work in cahoots. And what's so sad is as Kang Chi and Chung Jo leave the area and they're walking through the forest, you see the head minion and his soldiers and the gangster and all his bounty hunters literally getting ready to ambush them. And then the head minion looks to Tae Suh, who happens to be right there with him, and says, thank you, a lot of this wouldn't have been possible without your help. And then he hands him the sword, and he says, I'll give you the honor of beheading, Kang Chi, right? Only that way will you ensure the safety of your sister. Well, as soon as he walks away with his minions, he tells his minions, as soon as Kang Chi is dead, I want you to kill Tae Suh and I want you to kill the gangster and all of his men. So all loose ends would be tied up and the only one alive would be Chung Jo to take back to Chogunum. Oh, the evil machinations of this guy, right? So Tae Suh, never make bargains with the devil. We've already, discussed this on the blog. They never keep their, bargain. But anyway, so was it Chung Jo and Kang Chi are taking a rest, and Chung Jo looks at Kang Chi and she's like, do you know that you haven't said a single word since we left? And Kang Chi's like, oh really? I must have, I have a lot on my mind. And then Chung Jo says, you just seem different since I last met you. And then Kang Chi fingers his bracelet. He thinks back to the conversation he had with Yeo Wool. How Yeo Wool had said, just tell her, you never know. She may just say, it's okay, you're still Kang Chi on the inside. I still love you, right? So he's about to tell her, saying, hey, I found out about my birth parents and about my father. And as he's about to tell her about the father, the gangster guy shows up, and then very reminiscent of episode 2, the one where, Woryong was chained up as Hoa was like screaming for him. We see the same thing happen with Kang Chi. So he's chained up, Chung Jo is screaming for him, and into that scene walks Tae Suh with the sword, and he basically says, I'm sorry, Kang Chi, I have to do this. And Kang Chi literally has tears in his eyes as he realizes the family that he held so dear, the family that he was trying so hard to establish at the 100-year inn, had just turned on him. And so Tae Suh, one of the things that the head minion had told Tae Suh was, make sure you take the bracelet off before you behead the guy, right? So Tae Suh grabs Kang Chi's hand and he's about to pull the bracelet, and you see Kang Chi literally say, no, no, no. Tae Suh takes it off, and then he takes out the sword, and literally that's how the episode ends. So episode 12 should be really awesome, right? The previews, I've already done the translation of the dialogues on my blog. The previews look pretty darn good. So we're really going to see, those of you who don't want to see the spoiler or hear spoilers, stop now. But in episode 12, if the spoiler, everything in the spoiler happens to be, true in episode 12, like they don't fake us out and save it for episode 13 or 14, then Kang Chi's going to have confirmation that Yeo Wool will stick by his side, even when he is in his grotesque Kumyo form. And there's a really great shot of Kang Chi or Yeo Wool's human hand holding Kang Chi's kumyo hand. It's just so beautifully done. So anyway, we're about 25 minutes. I gotta stop. So take care, everyone. I hope this recap was understandable, and I will see you tomorrow. Bye.